Hey guys, welcome to part 2, day 2 of a walkthrough of my book, Make Art with Python. Today we're going to do the second chapter, which is called Computational Thinking. So in this chapter, we're going to go through the main building blocks of what it takes to write programs. So we're going to walk through loops, variables, some of the Python basic data types, control flow, which is like if statements, while loops, and then finally we're going to finish up with some syntax. So by the end of this day and chapter, we're going to have a fully running program that takes users' input and draws on the screen depending on what they enter. So let's get started by jumping into this program. So if you look at the program that we had from yesterday, let's make sure that I'm in the right directory first. Yep, there's my Turtley program, and here's everything that I wrote before. So if I look at my program, and let's try running it, right? Just to make sure we're on the same page. Turtley.py, and we have this drawing, and it goes and it draws a square, and we have to hit enter to close the program. So one thing about this is this turtle.forward and turtle.right, that repeats itself 4 times. So we're going to start this chapter introducing something called a loop. So the way we make a loop is by typing out for, and you can see Python highlights this just like it does for the import command. So for side in range 4, and then what we need to do is we need to have 4 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then again 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, and so if I get rid of these other statements, right? So let's take a look at this. What's happening here? When we do these 4 spaces, right, it lets Python know we want to run this bit of code afterwards. When we begin at the beginning, right, again, it lets Python know that's the end of it. Okay, so let's save this and try running it again. So this should do the exact same thing as before, right? Nothing should have changed. So we look and we see, and boom, we've got our perfect square that we had from before. So just to make sure and show that we're not really running the same old code, let's change this range number here, right? And you can see it's got the open and close parentheses. Let's change this to 8. So, and just so we're clear here, I have this open parentheses, close parentheses, and then a colon. And so the way you get that is you hold shift and you press the semicolon button on your keyboard, just in case. So let me save that, right? It's saved. And then run the program again. And now you can see it just drew itself double. I don't know if you saw that or not, but it definitely drew itself twice. So, for loops, right? It's a way to do a block of code over and over again. So what's useful about that? How do we use that to our advantage? What is it about that that gives us some power? Well, let's try printing, okay? So this print command is going to let us see what side is set to, okay? And so this for statement, what it's doing is it's going from 0 to 7, right? That's 8 numbers, starting to count from 0. And it's setting side to be 0 and running through this, and then running it again through as 1, 2, 3, all the way up through 7. It's difficult to explain, so let's just look and see what happens. So if you look over here in our terminal, you can see after each run through or loop, it prints 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's try using side to change how much we're rotating by. And so this to me is one of the really exciting parts about learning programming, is realizing when you can experiment and play around with things and not necessarily knowing what things are going to end up as. So first I've got to quit here, and let's save this. So what we've done is we've got this turn and we've added our side to it. So it's going to turn a little bit more every time it turns, right? So let's try that. Let's see what happens. All right, so you can see it started to rotate that square a little bit. Let's get really crazy here, and let's add side to how long it is, and let's just go for 24. Let's see what happens. And so you can see loops kind of give us a way to really start to change things. And I encourage you to play around with this. Like, what happens if you would multiply this? Or maybe, what if side was times 10? Let's see what happens there, right? And doing this sort of graphic feedback gives you a feel for what you're really doing. And so you can see doing this times 10 makes a lot of the same moves in general. Either way, cool. So that's loops, right? You can kind of play around there, and you see this range number. You can also, and this is kind of getting ahead, but you can also do a start and a stop. So we can start at 55 and go to 75. So let's save that, and let's try running it again. Let's see what happens here. It's doing a lot of spinning and a lot of looking around for where to go next. And so one thing that's cool to see right now is if I hit enter, remember how our program exits after it gets that input? Because it's still in this loop, it's not going to exit, right? Because we're still going through this code, right? And this part of the code isn't done. It hasn't yet finished. Once it finishes this and gets that input, of course, it closes. So this side right here, this is what's called a variable. Let's open up a Python shell and play around with variables in general. So a variable can be anything that has a name and isn't reserved by Python. So let's set a equal to 55 and b equal to 10. If I hit A, it's going to print out 55. That is the value of A. If I hit B and enter, it's going to print out the value of B. If I do A plus B, it's going to return the value of A plus B. Now, if I wanted to change A to be A plus B, I'd have to do this equal sign here, right? And that's called the assignment operator. And so now if we hit A, we can see A has become 55. B hasn't been changed at all because it wasn't part of that assignment, right? There was nothing changed about B. So A and B are both variables, and they can both be changed. Now, we've seen before so far that variables are set to numbers, but we can also set our variable to something called a string, right? And so now if we hit A, we'll see that we have a string. So strings are kind of tricky in that if we tried A plus you there, you can see hello world, you there gets put together, right? It's just like addition. Can we do subtraction? Can we do A minus quote world? No, you can't. So some of the operators are available for strings and others aren't. So the addition operator is one way to combine or concatenate strings. So if we do A, right, it's still hello world. Let's do A plus 55. Okay, this error, type error, must be string, not integer, lets us know that we're trying to put together two different types of variables, right? So A is a string. We can do type A, and it tells you it's a string. We can do type 5, and it tells you it's an integer. Okay, so if we do A plus string 5, it's going to convert 5 to a string. So let's see, B is still 10. So let's do A plus str, and str is built into Python. And now you can see we've added the two together. But again, we're not assigning anything. So if I do A, it's still hello world. So we've done integers, we've done strings. Now let's do one more thing before we dive back into control flow. And this is called lists. So lists are kind of tricky. Remember how when we were doing the range up here, we always started from 0 and we went to 3? Lists are ways of making combinations of things. So I can do A equals 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And you'll see I have this open bracket and close bracket. This is different from the parentheses. This isn't the parentheses. This is the open bracket and close bracket. And each of these numbers in here is separated by space. So if I hit a comma. So if I hit A, you'll see I have 1, 2, 3, 4. And so I can find out what's called the 0th element of the array. So that's called the first element of the array. So if I hit A0, you're going to see it's 1. Okay? So if I do A1, it's actually going to be the first element. So there's the 0th element, and this is very tricky for beginners because 0 being the start of where you count is not normal for most people. So you'll see 0th element is 1, and then the first element is 2. This doesn't make sense. It's all right. So with arrays or lists, sorry, if I try to add an element to it, like let's see if I tried to add 50, right? A plus 50. What do you think that would do? And since we're in the shell, the Python shell, just go for it. Like you're not going to break anything. And you're going to see that you can't concatenate a list, not int, to list. Okay, so type A, and you can see A is a list, right? And then type 50, which we know is an integer, right? So A is a list, and lists have a way of adding to them called append. So if we do list.append 50, and then we type in A, you can see we've added the element 50 to our list. One more crazy thing about lists. A.append they can take different types. They don't all have to be the same type. So we have integers and strings inside of a list. It can be tricky if you expect integers in your list and you accidentally put strings in your list somewhere else. So we know how to add items to our list, right? We know how to access the elements in our list. What about removing things from our list? So there's a list function. It's in every list, right? Dot remove hello world. And so because I didn't have the exclamation mark, it didn't match. So it's an exact match, right? It's not going to be a half match. So if we do A, you're going to see hello world is removed. So let's remove 50 and then A. So you don't just have to remove from the list like that. You can also do something called pop. So pop, we're going to do the 0th element. We're going to pop the 0th element. And I want you to pay close attention to what happens. So if I do a.pop, it's going to return 1, right? So it's returning the very first element in this list. And now if we look at A, that very first element is now out of the list. So that's some very basic list manipulation. So moving on. We haven't really talked about doing multiplication, doing math. So if I do 10 divided by 2, it's going to be 5, right? There's also this thing called integer division. So doing this double slash is going to say, hey, make this an integer. So if I do 11 divided by 2, it's still going to be 5, right? And then if I do 11 divided by 2, I'm going to get 5.5. So this integer division will be useful later when we need to have numbers that are even. For instance, when we're addressing pixels on our screen. That's kind of jumping ahead. So finally, let's kind of get into one more thing called control flow, right? So we talked before about if statements. So if a statement is true, execute this part of code. If it's false, execute this part of code. So the way that you decide those things is using something called Boolean logic. So we have a few built-in operators. So 10 is greater than 11. False, okay? 11 is greater than 10. True. All right. Not very interesting, right? 10 equals 10. So you'll see here I have this double equals operator. This is saying, is 10 equal to 10? This isn't assigning or changing 10, right? Because you can't do that. 10 equals 11. You can't assign anything. So if we say 10 double equals 11, it's false, right? We can also say 10 exclamation mark equals, which is not equals to. So 10 not equals to 11, which is true. You can also do strings. So we can say and so you can see there, it doesn't matter if you use the single quote or double quote, that the string is still, the value inside of it is still equal. So we can do hello equals hello. It's going to be the same. So it's all good. All right. So finally, let's jump into the syntax by writing the program that's in this chapter. All right. I'm just going to, well, first let's exit here. We did a lot of kind of very quickly, very high level playing around with our data types. But now we're going to jump into the code exercise from this chapter. So we're going to import turtle, right? That's our turtle drawing program. And that gives us this turtle dot, right? And then in Visual Studio Code, you get all these things that pop up. And these are all the functions that are available inside of the turtle library. So this import turtle is saying, put this turtle inside of our program. Anyways, back to the code. Running equals true. So we're creating a variable called running, and we're setting it to equal true. And then we're going to do a while loop. So while running. So this is saying, while running is true, do this over and over again, right? And as soon as running becomes false, stop doing this. And since there's no code after this, or there will be no code after this, the program will stop running and exit. So while running, print, enter triangle, square, or exit. And then we're going to take we're going to create another variable called entered, and we're going to set it equal to whatever the user inputs, okay? So this is going to give them a command prompt, and rather than just exiting or waiting for them to hit enter to exit, this is going to take whatever they enter and set entered into that, okay? The variable entered is going to be set to whatever they entered, typed. So if entered equals, so is triangle. So if they type out triangle just like that, right? The exact same, no capitalization, no nothing. For I in range, and how many sides does a triangle have? 3, right? Yeah, you know that for sure. Turtle dot forward 100, right? Turtle dot right 120 degrees 3 times. It adds up to 360 degrees, right? And then we're going to do an elif, okay? Square. Turtle dot forward 100. Turtle dot right 90, as we did before, right? And then we need to anticipate if they hit exit, right? Because they want to be able to quit this program. And we're going to set running to be false, right? And then we're going to print, let's put it in quotes. And then if they didn't type in anything we know, let's just say not a command. Save it. And now let's see if it runs. So one thing about typing out a program, especially when you're first starting out, you're definitely going to make mistakes. You're definitely going to type out things wrong, and you're going to run into errors. And it can be really frustrating, but this is like one of the big parts of learning programming that nobody really appreciates, and that is like getting a feel for what's important to get right. And usually it's everything. So let's see. All right, so let's try triangle. All right, it worked first try. Well, let's not jump to conclusions. Let's try square. All right, triangle, square work. Let's try to get both on the screen at the same time so that we don't have to do this back and forth thing. All right, let's do triangle one more time. All right, drew another triangle. Square. Now let's try gibberish. Oh, not a command, right? We remember that from our else loop. And so here you can see we have this elif squared. So if I enter, let's try this. Triangle square. What do you think is going to happen? Not a command. You got to remember here that this is a precise equals, right? If I try triangle square, it's not the same. We have this equals, double equals operator, right? To be an exact match. So when we enter triangle square, it's not matching. When we enter anything other than triangle or square, it's not going to match. And so if we type in exit, our program exits. Perfect, right? So we went through a lot here. The final thing that I have you do in the chapter is adding in a hexagon and then possibly looking up the documentation to figure out how to draw a circle using Turtle. So let me know if you do it, and let me know if you get stuck, and thanks so much. I hope you learned something.